My dad chose my cousin over me, funded his future and ruined mine, but karma came back to bite him when I built my own life. I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here I am. I'm 28. I'm a 28-year-old man who's had a bit of a rough time, especially with family. My mum died while she was giving birth to me, which probably set the tone for my relationship with my dad. He never really got over her death and always treated me as if I were the reason she was gone. Naturally, I have no memories of my mum. My dad had a tough life, especially with his family. Mum died while she was giving birth to me, which probably explains the relationship I had with my dad. He never really got over her death and always treated me as if I were the reason she was gone. I've heard loads of stories from relatives about how thrilled she was to have me. She'd always longed to become a mother and had faced years of fertility struggles before finally conceiving me. This knowledge only makes the whole situation more heartbreaking. She finally achieved her dream, only to have it tragically cut short. As I was growing up, our home was filled with photographs of my mother. My father kept everything just as she had left it, almost as if the house were a shrine to her memory. Her clothes remained hanging in the closet and her books still lined the shelves. It felt as though I was living with the ghost of a woman I would never have. I would sneak into their room just to touch her things, trying to make some sort of connection with the mother I never met. My relationship with my father was different though. He was there physically, but emotionally he was on a different planet. He made sure I was fed, clothed and made it to school on time, but there was never any warmth or affection. No hugs, no, I love you, not even a simple pat on the back for a job well done. I always felt like an outsider in my own home. Most days, my father barely even looked at me. He hardly ever spoke to me, and when he did, it was usually to criticize or compare me to my cousin Jake. Jake's dad, my uncle, died in a car accident when Jake was 7, so my dad kind of took him under his wing. I still remember the day we received the news about my uncle's death. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon, and I was sat at the kitchen table doing my homework when the phone rang. My dad answered and I could see he looked really upset while he listened to whoever was on the other end of the line. That was the first and only time I ever saw my dad cry. After they hung up, he sat down heavily at the table and stared into space for a bit. What felt like hours. Jake started spending a lot more time at our house after that, and I was excited at first. I thought that having another kid around might make things more fun and might even help my dad open up a bit, but it didn't take me long to understand that Jake's presence made my relationship with my dad even worse. He often asked, "Why can't you be more like Jake?" Or Jake would never do that. It felt like Jake was the son he had always wanted, and I was just there. Jake was sporty, friendly and charming, which I wasn't. Jake was the life of the party, while I was shy and liked to read. It was delicious for my dad. I worked really hard to make my dad happy, but it never seemed to work. I tried to learn about his interests, got good grades and joined every sports team. My dad thought Jake could never do a bad thing. He would compliment Jake on the smallest things, but I never got any credit for my own accomplishments. I won a science fair at school. When I was about 12 years old, my project was complicated. I put a lot of effort into finding out about his interests, getting good grades and joining every sports team my dad thought Jake could ever do. He would compliment Jake on the smallest things, but I never got any credit for my own accomplishments. I remember when I was about 12, I wanted a science fair at school. My project was a complicated model of the solar system that could move. I worked on it for weeks and couldn't wait to tell my dad. I thought this would finally make him happy. His laughter and talk with Jake about a football game made me laugh. When I got home, I told him I won, but he just nodded and went back to talking to Jake. It felt like I wasn't there. I spent weeks working on this model of the solar system that could move. I was really excited to tell my dad, as I thought it would finally make him happy. His laughter and our conversation about a football game made me laugh when I got home. I told him I had won, but he just nodded and went back to talking to Jake. It felt like I wasn't there. Things got worse as we got older because of the bias. People always made fun of Jake and me because we were in the same grade. I did better in school than Jake did in high school, but my dad would always find ways to downplay my achievements. Well, Jake's got more important things to think about than just grades, he would say during one parent meeting. Things got worse as we got older because of prejudice. People always made fun of Jake and me because we were in the same grade. I did better in school than Jake, but my dad always found ways to make my achievements seem unimportant. Well, Jake's got more important things to think about than just grades, he would say during one parent-teacher meeting. My English teacher raved about an essay I'd written. She told my dad it was one of the best papers she had ever seen from a kid my age and that she thought I would make a great writer. My dad just grunted and asked if this would help me get a big grant for sports. The teacher looked confused, and I was so embarrassed. I was at a meeting with my English teacher the other day and she was raving about an essay I'd written. She even told my dad it was one of the best papers she'd ever seen from a kid my age and that she thought I'd make a great writer. My dad just grunted and asked if it'd help me get a big grant for sports. The teacher looked confused and I was so embarrassed that my face burned. But deep down, I still yearned for change. I reasoned that perhaps everything would be fine if only I could locate the appropriate thing, the magic key unlocking my dad's adoration. I pursued that unattainable dream all through my childhood and teenage years. When it came time for. Even though I was burning up, I still had this feeling deep down that I wanted things to change. I thought that if I could just find the right thing, everything would be fine. I was after this thing that would make my dad love me, and I was after it all through my childhood and my teenage years. Then, when it was time for college, the real kickback was that I had got myself into a pretty good university and I was all set to start my future. I knew money would be tight, but I thought my dad would still be able to help out a bit. But I guess I was wrong when I heard my dad on the phone to Jake, telling him he'd pay for his whole college. Tuition will always stick with me. My dad looked at me like I was insane when I asked if he could help out too. Jake needs it more than I can afford to pay for both of you, he said. That's exactly how my college dreams vanished. I tried to make it work, but I was working evenings and weekends, and had a part-time job. I had a part-time job at a nearby diner. I applied for every scholarship I could find, but it wasn't enough. It was all too much. I was juggling my classes, working enough hours to pay for things, and still finding time to study and sleep. There has to be a way. After the first semester, I found myself having to drop out on my own. I couldn't afford it. The part-time job wasn't enough. The work I could find hardly covered tuition fees. Meanwhile, Jake was living it at a famous university, completely on his dad's money, and he'd share images of his elegant dorm room, his spring break travels, the new laptop my dad had bought him for college, on social media. Every post was like a knife in my gut. That moment was the breaking point for me. I gathered my belongings and left home, cutting off all contact with both my father and Jake. It was incredibly painful, but I knew I had to escape that toxic situation. I couldn't live in the shadow of my late mother and the cousin who had replaced me in my father's heart. The past few years have been tough, to say the least. I've taken on various jobs to make ends meet, done whatever I could to get by. I've waited tables, worked in construction, done night shifts at gas stations, anything to make sure I had a roof over my head and food to eat. It's been hard, especially when I see updates from Jake on social media about his incredible college life. He's got a great job after graduating, but I'm still building a life on my own terms. I've got a decent job now, not something fancy, but it covers the bills. I'm working as a manager at a local bookstore. It's not the career I imagined, but I like being surrounded by books all day. I'm also taking night classes at the community college to get the degree I've always wanted. It's not an easy journey, but at least I'm making it on my own. I've made some great friends along the way. They're people who accept me for who I am, not for who they want me to be. They've become the family I never truly had. We have weekly game nights, go on camping trips when we can afford it, and support each other through thick and thin. It's far from perfect, but it's mine, and that makes all the difference. I thought I had left all that family drama behind me, but life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Yesterday, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I was pretty shocked to hear my dad's voice on the other end when I answered. We hadn't spoken for 3 years and now he was reaching out for help. I'm not sure how to feel about it, but one thing's for sure, I'm no longer that kid desperate for his approval. Update: it's been a week since my dad's unexpected call, and I'm still trying to process everything that happened. Speaking with him on the phone brought back a bunch of memories, most of which were not good, but his voice. He was different this time. Older, more worn out, more desperate. He started with small talk, asking how I was doing. It felt awkward and forced, as if he was trying to pretend the last few years hadn't happened. Then he got to the real reason for his call: he needed money, and a lot of it. At first, I was too shocked to respond. This was the man who had never given me a dime for college, who had chosen my cousin over me time and time again, and now he was asking me for financial help. The irony was not lost on me when I finally found I asked him why he was coming to me, not Jake, his golden boy. Shouldn't he be the one to help out my dad? He fell silent for a moment and then mumbled something about Jake being busy with his new job and not having the means to help right now. I couldn't help but laugh. After years of being told how much better Jake was and how he deserved the opportunities, I didn't know what to do. I made it clear to my dad exactly what I thought about that idea. I suggested he go and talk to Jake instead. He'd always been the favorite, so there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then my dad started to say something about how he regretted some of the choices he'd made and how he wanted to make things right, but I cut him off. I told him it was too little too late. I'd spent years trying to earn his love and approval, and now that he needed something from me, he was ready to play the remorseful father. I ended the call shortly after that. I experienced a range of feelings as soon as I hung up. I turned him away, and part of me felt bad about it because he was still my dad. But I also felt a sense of relief because I'd stood up for myself for the first time. I didn't give in to the need for his approval, which had driven me for so long. The next few days were tough. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if I'd done the right thing. I thought about all the times I needed help from Aid, but he wasn't there. I thought about the college tuition, but also the little moments when a child needed their dad to be there for school activities, give advice and help with learning to drive. He had been MIA throughout. I remembered my first heartbreak when I was 16. Her name was Sarah and I thought she was the one. We had been dating for 6 months when she broke up with me for one of the football players, and I was devastated. I came home that day, eyes red from crying, and my dad was in his usual spot on the couch watching TV. He looked up when I walked in. He stood there for a moment, hoping he would ask what I messed up, but he just grunted and told me I was blocking the screen. I went to my room and cried myself to sleep that night. Then there was the time I got my driver's license. Most of my friends' dads had taught them how to drive, but not mine. I had to beg my neighbor, Mr. Johnson, to teach me. When I finally passed the test, I came home excited to share the news. My dad was in the garage working on his car with Jake. I showed them my new license. Jake congratulated me, but my dad just nodded and went back to explaining something. I don't think Jake ever let me drive his car, which made me think about what kind of trouble he was in to need my money. My dad was always very proud, almost too much. It must have been important for him to reach out in this way. Even with everything, I was still a little worried about him, but then I thought about all the times I had been worried about my own future because I wasn't making enough money since I had to quit college. What did he care about then? I had to work. I did things on my own, and I made my own life without his help. Why should I help him right now? I remembered the year I lived on my own after moving out to start over. I moved to a new place where no one knew me, got any job I could find and found a tiny studio room that I could barely afford. I cleaned during the day and worked as a bartender at night. I was always tired, but I was able to get through it on my own. Some nights, when I got home from work at the bar, my feet hurt and stank. I was wondering if I'd made a mistake, like smoke and beer. I could have put my pride aside, stayed home and tried to work things out with my dad, but then I remembered being judged all the time and never feeling good enough. I knew I'd made the right choice, though as the days went by, I felt better about it. I understood that by not giving in to his request, I was finally giving him a handle on things. I wasn't the same kid he used to be able to ignore and push around. Today, I'm an adult, and I choose. I don't owe him anything, but I was still curious about why it happened. What went wrong with Jake, the perfect child, that he couldn't or wouldn't help? There were times when I wanted to find out more about what was going on with my dad and my cousin, but I hesitated. Did I really want to open that can of worms? Was it worth potentially stirring up all that old pain and resentment? I thought about getting in touch with Jake's mom, my aunt, even though she was always nice to me, and I think she might understand what's going on. I saw her last at a family get-together, right before I left for work. She gave Jake a big hug and told him she was proud of him for getting into such a good college. She only gave me a weak smile and a pat on the shoulder when it was my turn to leave. I decided not to call her, and I'm still not sure what to do next. As I write this report, part of me wants to forget about the past and focus on my own stuff. I'm curious about the changes in my dad's life lately. I'm wondering what's going on with him and Jake. I'm thinking about looking into it more, but I'll have to wait and see. I haven't updated in about a month, and a lot has happened since then. I had to do some digging to find out why my dad suddenly needed help and why Jake wasn't stepping up. I started by reaching out to a few family friends who are still in touch. At first, my dad and his friend weren't talking to each other much, but I managed to figure out what was going on. I called Mrs. Peterson first. She was like my mom's bestie and she was always nice to me growing up. She was a bit surprised to hear from me, but she was happy to chat. After a bit of small talk, I started to ask about my dad and Jake. Mrs. Peterson hesitated, then sighed deeply before telling me what she knew. It turns out that my dad had gone all in on supporting Jake's dad. Really went above and beyond, not just paying for college, but helping with the deposit on a house, buying a car and even putting money into a business. He wanted to do the same for Jake, but he took out loans and maxed out his credit cards, ending up in debt. Mrs. Peterson told me about a conversation she had with my dad a few years back, when he was bragging about Jake's successes and saying how he was going to be a one day. When she asked about me, my dad just gave a shrug and said he hoped I was doing okay. The indifference in his voice had shocked her. Next, I got in touch with my old neighbor, Mr. Johnson, who taught me how to drive. He'd always been observant and filled me in on some of the more recent developments. Apparently, Jake had convinced my dad to invest in a startup he was launching with some college friends. It was some kind of tech company, but Mr. Johnson wasn't clear on the so. Here's the deal. My dad had remortgaged the house to get the money for the investment. But here's where it gets interesting. Jake's new job, the one my dad had been super proud about, wasn't going as well as expected. The business had flopped, and Jake was now struggling to make ends meet. So, when my dad turned to him for help with the debt, Jake apparently told him he couldn't spare anything right now. Mr. Johnson overheard an argument between my dad and Jake just a few weeks ago. Jake had come over. I was driving a flashy new car and my dad confronted him about the failed business and the money he'd invested. Jake yelled something about how it wasn't his fault, the market had changed, and that he'd pay my dad back when he could. Then he peeled out of the driveway, leaving my dad standing there looking utterly defeated. I have to admit, a part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction after years of being compared to Jake and hearing how I didn't measure up. It turned out that the golden child wasn't. So, Jake got all the attention, and now the whole thing's fallen apart. But honestly, I'm just tired. Tired of all the drama, the constant pain, and all the what-ifs. I can't help but wonder how things might have been if my dad had just invested in me the way he did in Jake. Maybe I would have finished college and maybe I'd be doing a totally different job now. But then again, maybe I wouldn't have learned the really valuable lessons I did about myself. Reliance and perseverance. I remembered the tough times after dropping out of college, how I juggled multiple jobs, often eating ramen noodles and drinking cheap coffee. I thought about the long nights I spent studying after exhausting shifts, driven by the determination to improve myself, even without the benefit of a formal education. It had been a hard journey, but it shaped me into the person I am today. I wasn't sure if I should tell my dad what I had learned, but after some thought, I chose to. I remembered the tough times after dropping out of college, how I juggled multiple jobs, often eating ramen noodles and drinking cheap coffee. I thought about the long nights I spent studying after exhausting shifts, driven by the determination to improve myself, even without the benefit of a formal education. It had been a hard journey, but it shaped me into the person I am today. I wasn't sure if I should tell my dad what I had learned, but after some thought, I chose to. I texted him to tell him I knew what was going on with Jake and the bill. I didn't offer to help, but I also didn't brag. What I really said was that I hoped he could see now that the decisions he made had effects on both of us. After a few hours, he answered. He said sorry and a lot of things in a long message. He told me that he knew he had been unfair to me and that his grief over my mom's death had made him lose his temper. He talked about how proud my mom would have been of the man I'd become. He wasn't the best dad, but he did ask if we could meet up and have a chat. I thought about that message for ages before deciding what to do. I still had a little boy inside me who wanted his dad's love, so there was a part of me that wanted to say yes. I imagined a time when we'd meet up, talk things out, and our relationship would be fixed magically. But as an adult who has had to work hard for everything, I knew better. I reflected on all the important milestones in my life. I thought about how my dad had missed my high school graduation, when I scanned the audience for a glimpse of him but felt disappointed. I also thought about my first apartment, which I furnished with second-hand stuff and a lot of determination, and the promotion I recently got at the bookstore. I didn't have anyone to share that moment with except my friends. In the end, I decided to reply to my dad, letting him know that I wasn't ready for a meeting. While I accepted his apology, I made it clear that words alone couldn't erase the years of neglect and favoritism I had experienced. I told him I needed some time and space, and that he needed to respect that. I also said that I wouldn't be paying him back. He had made his own decisions, and that was why he was in this situation. I had made my own decisions that had led me to where I am now. I told him I needed time and space, and that he needed to respect that. I also said that I wouldn't be paying him back. He made his own mistakes, and now I'm not going to go back and fix them for him. As I'm writing this, I feel a bit lighter. I've been trying so hard to earn my dad's love for so long, and I've been asking myself what was wrong with me. I've realized that it was never about me. It was about his own unresolved issues and his inability to cope with loss and grief. I don't know what the future holds for my relationship with my dad, or whether there will be any relationship at all. Maybe one day we'll have a genuine conversation about everything that's happened. For now, I'm focusing on my own life and personal growth. I'm continuing with my night classes and working towards that degree. I'm also building relationships with people who appreciate me for who I am, not for who I'm not. They want me to be just like last week. I helped my friend Sarah, not Sarah from high school, move into her new apartment by unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. It dawned on me that these connections, this chosen family, are what truly matter, not the approval of someone who was never able to recognize my worth. Life is not always easy, but I am forging my own path, and for the first time in a very long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I meant to be. I do not know what tomorrow will bring, but I am confident that I will face it on my own terms with the strength I have developed through years of my dad's favoritism can't ever take away my reliance. Thanks for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.